Now, Clayton's here to talk about his experiences as an entrepreneur and investor on the really on the positioning of entrepreneurial brands. So there's a way you kind of get beyond stealing share and move toward unlocking growth in categories and in strategy. Clayton is an incredibly inspiring teacher as well as a learner. So I need to get out of his way before I get all verklempt. But I just want to welcome him. Clayton Christopher.
Introduction, and thanks for keeping me out too late last night, and one too many glasses of wine. I just finished my second coffee of the morning, so it's sad that I need these now. This just happened in the past 6 months. So, but seriously, Jeff and John, Craven, thank you guys for having me here, and thank you for everything that you guys do for the industry. It's just awesome to see how much this has grown over the years. I think the first one I attended and spoke at was in New York, and then was here 4 or 5 years ago, and it's amazing to see how it's grown and what you guys do for the industry. True stewards of the industry. Thank you for y'all's work. Yeah, because I think that the first time you and I met, Jeff, it was, it was probably 16 or 17 years ago, and it was at a Whole Foods in Boston. I was in there merchandising, doing a quick demo, and fighting for shelf space, probably losing some of the tags of my competitors next to me, which kind of just seemed to happen when I was in those stores. And I remember that was the first time we sat down, so we've been at it a while here. So Jeff and I were talking, several months ago when he asked me to come speak, and the conversation went all over the place, and we were like, there's so many places it could go. You know, it was going to be talking about best practices around fundraising, growth strategies, using data for innovation. I mean, literally, we just were like, where could this go? But this word unlock kind of kept coming up. So one, I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for Q&A, because I'm here to serve the entrepreneurs in this room, because I know how challenging your journey is, because I've been in the entrepreneurs and the operator's shoes far more than I have kind of the professional investor's shoes. So I want to make sure that you're able to ask questions here today. So please kind of pull the cord when I need to get off here. So when I think of kind of the unlock and some of these growth strategies, I really think about two different areas. I think about external, which is typically what we hear, and Vanessa did a great job of outlining some of those strategies around using data. But I also think of internal, some of the soft, kind of touchy-feely stuff that doesn't get talked about as much, but is absolutely as important, and in some ways more important. So I'd like to touch on both those. So I'm gonna jump into some of the external stuff, and these are basic. Some of them are going to sound real basic that I see too often companies take for granted. And I'm bringing these up because I'm around a lot of experienced teams, and I see some of these teams on a regular basis kind of miss a lot of these basics, so I can't help but bring them up again. So one of these I'm just going to call the old 80-20 rule. Again, we've all heard this, but it's incredible how often I see companies failing to focus on this stuff. As we all know, growing a national beverage brand is an expensive endeavor, and it's only gotten more expensive as more capital has come into the industry and as distributors' mind shares have gotten more and more diluted. So it's why it's so critical to be laser focused on your team's energy and where you deploy your team's energy and how you measure that. Your sales team, I fully believe your sales team should be spending at least 80% of their time on the 20% of the accounts that are going to generate at least 80% of the volume. You know, you've all heard it kind of broken down into A, B, C, and D accounts. At least 80% of your sales team's time should be spent, if they're not opening up new accounts, on winning in those A accounts. You're not going to get kicked out of most chains if you're crushing it in their top stores. And then ideally, you convince the buyer, if you're an early stage brand, to only put you in the top percentage of those stores where you know your consumer is shopping and we know your brand is most likely to succeed. I know when I was a young entrepreneur, I used to get really excited about landing a chain. It's like, oh my gosh, we just got Kroger, this division of Safeway. Like, I stopped after the first 5 or 6 years in the trenches. I no longer get excited anymore about landing a chain. I kind of take that for granted. You should have a product and a sales story that's compelling enough to land the chain. What I get excited about is when I see our brands in the top half of the velocities of the category, and ideally the top quartile. I mean, you think about it like an A account versus a B account. I mean, an A account versus a B account is like 3 to 4x the velocity, and versus a C account, it's like can be 7 to 8x the velocity. So it's like just focus on the A accounts because that's where you're going to win. And it was shocking because I was actually talking to a well-known CEO, a well-known brand. Most of you will know in this room just a couple of weeks ago, and they had found out from a call that came in from a consumer that they hadn't been able to buy their product in literally one of their top 10, and this is a brand that's in tens of thousands of accounts across the country, and they'd been out of like probably it's a 10-store chain, Central Market. They'd been out of there for like almost a month and didn't even know about it. And this Central Market was like of their top 20 stores that do the greatest velocities for this brand. These were 10 of the top 20 stores, and it had to come from a consumer complaint. It amazes me. It amazes me. They had systems to track it in place, but they'd gotten so busy and were running so hard they weren't tracking the systems to make sure that they were focused on those accounts. I want to talk about marketing and consumer marketing for a moment because it is a hot topic with a lot of companies and boards that I'm on. I don't believe in spending real consumer marketing dollars. That's money outside of the stores until you have good ACV. And that doesn't mean digital or social. But this particularly includes field marketing, and I'm looking at Michelle here because we went through this exercise very recently at Rebel, and she's done an incredible job riding the ship there. And this includes field marketing, and I'd say because unless field marketing is spending most of their time in the stores in the early days, and I say early days, this is like less than 40% ACV. If you're less than 40% ACV, you're going to see ROI is going to go down and get worse and worse the lower your ACV is. I don't like spending real money on consumer marketing until a brand is at least at 40% ACV. And then when you do begin to spend that money outside of the store on consumer marketing, focus like a laser beam on who your core consumer is. And then on demos, too, there's an interesting demo strategy that served me really well that we learned from Vitamin Water years ago. When I was running Sweetleaf, we hired a number of, probably half our sales force was from Vitamin Water. It's always pretty easy to poach people after a big exit. And it was the 80-20 rule applied there as well. The way we were conducting demos back in the early days at Sweetleaf was we'd land a chain of, say, 100 stores. And if they were great stores, maybe we'd go big and do like one demo in every store. And if there was a so-so chain, a decent chain, like maybe we would go big and do one demo in the top 50 stores. Well, we completely changed our strategy there, and it paid off in a huge way. The ROI went up exponentially. And so what we learned is that rather than doing those demos kind of spread across a bunch of stores, we would sit back and wait for a couple of months. We would look at the data to see where our product naturally performed really well. The stores that were higher traffic, the stores where our demographic naturally shopped, and then we would take the top, call it 10 of those 100 stores, and we'd do 10 demos in the top 10 stores. That sounds kind of crazy, 10 demos in the top 10 stores. But what we found is instead of going from like half a case a week per SKU per store to like 1 case a week per SKU per store by pulling those demos across all those stores. Those top 10% of the stores where we were naturally already doing like 5 to 8 cases a week would go up to 30 to 40 cases a week. Vitamin water played it out. It worked for them. I was highly skeptical, but we tested it, and the same thing held true for us. And it was like 2x the ROI on our demo investment. And the shocking thing after 10 demos in each store, these top stores, we would go back and do a survey. There was still only 30% brand awareness after that level of investment and that level of volume. So still a ton of white space there. Using data for innovation. So, this can also go in a lot of different directions, but I'll tell you a story quickly that was a great unlock that we had at a board retreat with Kettle and Fire, which is a board that I'm on, a company down in Austin, Texas. Justin and Nick Mears, great guys, both Forbes Under 30 recipients, and it's true what I believe the highest quality bone broth on the market. They initially launched online because the vast majority of their consumers were using the product as a ready-to-drink for gut health and collagen protein. But as we began to roll the product out into retail, we wanted to learn if retail consumers were consuming and using our product the same way that the consumers were online. Because online, they were using it primarily for an RTD. It was like 90-something% when we would do surveys said that that's how they were using it, drinking it. But then what we found after we started to get some retail distribution, primarily Whole Foods and some select Krogers, is a significant percentage of retail consumers were actually using the product to cook with. And it was like, whoa, you're actually, because it tastes a lot better than the broths that are out there. They're pretty, not made from renderings and not bones. So it was pretty shocking. So what we also looked at in the data was we saw that over 90% of the category in the broth and stock category was being driven by multi-serve, by 32 ounce, which doesn't sound that surprising. But literally it wasn't until we looked at that data, and we did it in a retreat format, not in a boardroom over a 4-hour board meeting, but literally off in the woods at my place in Jackson Hole. And that night at dinner, we were like, we don't walk towards this 32 ounce, we run. We've got to get there as quickly as possible. So we met with retailers about it to get their feedback on it. We met with consumers to get their feedback on it. And literally, I think we have a next year, and that's without getting into full distribution, about an 8 to 10 incremental revenue opportunity. That's including cannibalization, because we assume there's going to be some cannibalization of the single serve. But that was just a great way that we use data to unlock data not only from consumer insights, but data also from category data to help us unlock a huge growth opportunity. And the other one was getting away in the woods and spending quality time with the executive team and the board member. Because a lot of times I found that those aha moments, one, they come a lot more often when we're outside of a conference room, and they just happen a lot more when we build, trust and vulnerability with each other, which you really kind of have to go out in the woods and spend quality time to do that. Another one for data, and I'd say is kind of an unlock, was Waterloo Sparkling Water, a company that I co-founded with a friend, Sean Cusack, down in Austin, Texas. And this was one we're kind of constantly looking at data across all categories, and the sparkling water was a big category that was showing, this is several billion in revenue, tracking to, I think, $5 billion over the next few years. So it was a significant size category that was growing like gangbusters. And the leader, LaCroix, that has like 40% share, I was convinced, these guys are winning despite themselves, not because of any brilliant moves that National Beverage and that crazy CEO is making. No offense, but y'all read the news. And so the other thing that we noticed is that the flavor, there was not that many, it was dominated by LaCroix and private label. And then you had San Pellegrino and Topo Chico, but I almost didn't consider them competitors because they didn't have flavor. And I felt like the flavors were very bland. They fell flat. They weren't really delivering what consumers were looking for. Consumers love to talk taste, but as you know, we all vote with our palate. So we felt like we needed to push the flavors really hard, so we spent a lot of time on the flavors. Very complex formulations because we're using numerous flavor houses sometimes to develop just one flavor. We pushed the carbonation hard because we loved the carbonation that Topo Chico had, and that's what they're known for. And then we went into BPA-free cans. We were the first company to go into BPA-free cans, and we also went into non-GMO. We felt like we've got to differentiate as much as possible from LaCroix and especially from private label because we're never going to be able to compete with them on price. And so it was interesting because of this, because it was more carbonated and because the flavors were so much more fulsome, we went into this thinking that LaCroix was our competition and that private label was our competition. But what we found after getting into stores and doing some consumer research again, we found that we were actually converting consumers from carbonated soft drinks over to sparkling water because that jump from carbonated soft drink to sparkling water was just way too big for most consumers to make. But now we gave them something that was a nice bridge, a nice in-between. And once we started to find out that we're actually converting CSD consumers to sparkling water, oh my God. I mean, one, that just feels really good because you're literally like saving lives. But two, it just unlocks, now a $60 billion category instead of a $3.5 billion category. And, the results have been pretty staggering, literally. And I've never been a part of a brand that's grown so fast. And in just barely over 2 years, we just had our 2-year anniversary this fall. The company will do about $50 million in revenue this year. So you can see it was a category that was significantly under-indexed on competition. Not much innovation had happened within that category, and yet the category was growing really fast. It's not easy to find those, and it's certainly never easy, but it's paying off there. Another strategy that I want to talk about is really kind of a deep versus wide, or I call it narrow and deep versus wide and shallow growth strategy. And anybody that's known me for a while, I preach this over and over, especially to early stage brands. One of the biggest mistakes that I see brands make is they expand too quickly. And growth is so damn expensive in this industry. Again, you get really excited when you land a big chain. All that means is you're going to be spending that much more money. So at Deep Eddy, when I started Deep Eddy Vodka, we created a better mousetrap. It was a much higher quality product. We were using real tea instead of caramel coloring and tea flavoring, a very premium vodka that we distilled 10 times, and honey. So we knew it was a better tasting product. And we felt like the packaging was a lot better as well. Unfortunately, we weren't the first to market. There's 2 other brands out there, Jeremiah Weed and Firefly, that had kind of beaten us to the punch. And they were backed by really big companies, Sazerac and Diageo. So I knew we were never going to be able to outspend Sazerac and Diageo on a national level. I also knew that we were going to have to convert consumers. It wasn't like some first mover technology advantage. So our team decided, I said, we're not moving outside of Texas. And it was a small category. It's only like 100 million nationally, but it was growing very quickly. I said, we're not moving outside of Texas until we're number 1 in Texas. Because if we can't be number 1 in our own backyard, we don't have a chance of being number 2 nationally. And we at least have to be number 2 nationally for this company to be attractive. I don't know how long that was going to take, but it took 8. We overinvested in Texas because I knew on a small level we could absolutely spend the same resources as the big guys. And I knew that we needed to be able to spend the same amount of resources as the big guys and be armed with a better product in order to be number 1 in the category. And it took us 18 months. And within 18 months, we became number 1 in the sweet tea vodka category in Texas. We then moved into 4 other states. We looked at data to see which markets were over-indexed on sweet tea vodka consumption. We launched in those states. We got those established, and we had very tight. We said, we're not moving out of these 4 states until we're number 2 in the category. But then once we had a good base established in these 5 states, we then began to innovate. And that's when we said, let's kind of take this whole flavored vodka thing into other flavored vodkas. And all these other flavored vodkas were using artificial flavoring. I mean, even if you use natural flavoring, there's still residual color from the fruit because natural flavors are made from fruit. So all these flavored vodkas, it was like, they're made from artificial flavoring. It was crazy. So we used real fruit juice and we used natural flavors, and we launched Ruby Red, and literally we couldn't keep up with production. It was, kind of dumb luck to a certain degree, but we really we reinvented the flavored vodka category. So it was strange because the strategy changed dramatically at that point. We literally went from focusing on narrow and deep, and then we were like, I've got to be first mover advantage. So we moved into all 50 states as quickly as we could, and it paid off. Heaven Hill bought the company, a few years later. Diageo tried to buy it a year later and, made an offer that I almost couldn't refuse, but luckily we kept our head down for a couple more years and it paid off. So, but one thing I do want to talk about is the internal piece, because it's so important. Focus, I'm going to give you two before you come out, Jeff. One is focus. It's what probably most of the people in this room, including myself from time to time, suffer from. Bill Gates and Warren Buffett were being interviewed a few years back, and they asked them, what is the number one reason for your success? And without hesitation, both of them said focus. And I'm sure you've heard some of these tidbits from Buffett, but it's incredible. He reads for like 4 hours a day, doesn't do email, uses a flip phone. I just love this stuff. It is like putting the blinders on. It's one reason why I spend such little time on email, and I just have to say no to almost every meeting request because otherwise I can't serve the companies that I work with. The other one, I would say, is a commitment, an ongoing commitment to personal and professional development. A commitment, and what I like to say is you can't take care of yourselves if you don't take care of other people. Running a business, being an entrepreneur, being a CEO, being an executive on a fast growth team is so demanding. And if you're not taking care of yourselves, how are you going to take care of the people on that team? Because every day they're asking themselves, why should I follow you? Why should I follow you? So I know I'm running along here, so I'll let you come on up. But yeah, I've been involved in, for the past 20 years, I've sought out mentors, coaches, seminars, anything that I can find to continually lean into personal and professional development. And I have a long way to go, but I think it's kind of like you heard the quote from Michelangelo when he unveiled David, and they're like, how did you create that? And he said, I just chipped away everything that wasn't supposed to be there.
Yes. Yes, that's right. It's true. And I think we all appreciate your mentorship here. One of the things that you were talking about, though, is, and I talked about this with Matt a little bit yesterday, when you're trying so hard to get a base for a consumer to interact with, because that's sort of the transformational story of each of those kind of unlocked moments. There's a little bit of the Howard Schultz thing going on where you have to turn your product into the thing that the consumer wants, right? He didn't want to make lattes, he wanted to make espresso. So, when you're at this retreat with Kettle and Fire and you're saying, guess what? You're going to be stock. You're not going to be a beverage. How do you create that change in direction with the entrepreneur? How do you get the entrepreneur to accept that kind of change in direction?
Sure. I think the first thing, it's real tough to change directions in a business or to give that sort of dramatic feedback that you need to either change your product, we need to take this business in a different direction, if you haven't established trust. I'm on 9 boards, 7 CAVU, a nonprofit, another accelerator, but all the 90% of the aha moments come when we're outside of the board meeting. And I think whether it's within your executive team or with your broader board of directors, if you don't have trust, you're not going to have vulnerability. And if you don't have vulnerability, you're not going to speak up when you feel like you have an idea because you're afraid somebody's going to think you're stupid or it's going to get shot down, or if the entrepreneur is going to perhaps be a little more defensive and be more worried about being right than winning. But I think if you can have that vulnerability and that trust with the team, it's easier to get people in a mindset of winning versus being right.
Let's flip it around. As an investor, how are you trusting the entrepreneur with the funding that comes from what they know they need to do to unlock that growth?
I mean, gosh, trusting the entrepreneur, that's obviously there's a lot of diligence that goes in ahead of time before we would ever invest a check into the company. And one of the biggest check marks on that scorecard is integrity. If I don't feel like I can absolutely trust that entrepreneur and we're doing homework on folks that they've worked with along the way, I mean, trust and integrity is just paramount. You've got to be able to trust them. But outside of that, it's even if they don't mean to, I mean, we know they're going to make mistakes, but as much as we can help them build a world-class team around them and get the right systems and processes in place, the more likely, and get aligned on strategy, because there's so many bright and shiny objects that are going to come your way. The ability to say no to those bright and shiny objects is so much easier when you know the 3 to 5 strategic initiatives that should be taking up 90% of your day. And when we're in a board setting, like that's 90% of what I want to talk about.
Yeah, and that goes back, right? So one of the things that I always, and we need to wrap up, but one of the things that I always took away from your very first talk here in Santa Monica was this idea that when you were meeting with your board and your investors, they were strategy meetings. They weren't financial updates. That comes in the sort of regular communication, but are we sticking to what we're saying we're going to do from a strategic standpoint is such a core part of focus.
Right. I mean, ideally, you've recruited a world-class board that can add a lot of value. I mean, Tom First, we were talking about this last night. I was able to recruit him, and you were helpful on our board at Sweetleaf, and he was kind of the only operator that I had around the board. The rest of them were kind of Wall Street types. But ideally, you've recruited a board that is real value add, that has a lot of experience. And you can send out a board deck ahead of time, and we can read it and know 90% of it. Ideally, the majority of that time is spent brainstorming, especially as a first-time entrepreneur, tap into that experience and use that precious time to ask questions. You don't need to just sit there and form. You can do that very quickly, and most of it can be done ahead of time. Use that time to brainstorm, to seek feedback. The best and brightest entrepreneurs I know are highly intellectually curious. They ask a lot of questions, and they seek personal feedback on a very regular basis from mentors they trust.
All right, well, I know you've got a board meeting yourself, so we got to get out of here because there's a lot of stuff going on the live stream. I tell you all, 10:30, we're having the first set of the finals for the New Beverage Showdown, so please be back in here promptly then. And Clayton, thank you. That was great.
Hey, it's Ray Lateef with Taste Radio. If you like what you just saw, hit subscribe and ding the bell. You'll be happy you did.